The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kīlauea eruption update today, Thursday, September 30th. We're a bit over 24 hours into Kīlauea's newest summit eruption. You can see some video of it here. And we're going to give you guys a rundown of what we know, maybe not quite up to the very last current minute, but to within the last hour or so as we try to catch you up on what's happened on the volcano here. USGS has released several videos today. I'm just going to loop this one here as I talk our intro. Dane is going to be manning our chats, so let him know if you have any issues with our audio or video. Also, he'll be collecting questions for us to discuss. We are a little bit limited on time today. We probably won't go over an hour 15, hour 20. But we'll do as many as we can today, and we expect to come back live to you guys perhaps tomorrow again, and we'll be able to continue our discussion at that point in time. But in any case, he'll answer what he can in the chat, and we'll collect what we can to discuss later on. So this is the first USGS video here. This is that area that was first, where the fountains first came out. This is the edge of that large big island from the previous eruption down here at the bottom. So just past that, just east of that, we have these bubbling fountains coming up through the crust of the lava lake there. Maybe I can zoom it in a little bit so you guys can get a little bit more of a bigger screen experience there. All right, so really amazing stuff. Mahalo USGS. We're going to be sharing, not exclusively, but largely USGS photos, videos, data, and all that stuff. So we really appreciate them sharing all that information. And if you haven't watched our updates before, what we do is we try to collect all the USGS stuff as well as citizen science information and compile it for you guys. So you don't have to go chasing after it all over the place and can see it in one place all together with annotation and context as well. So here's the next video I'm going to show you guys. I'll start off with the videos today. We're looking here at that from the south. So this is the edge of that upper crater. The island itself is covered by this big cloud of fume right in here. So these are those same couple fountains we're just looking at from a different angle, more from that direction. And perhaps the fountains in this area might have been slightly larger originally early on. USGS is reporting that the measurements early on ranged from about 80 to 100 feet tall, 25 to 30 meters or so. So that's impressive. Of course, it's nowhere near any of our records, and so it's interesting to see that was the case, similar to the previous 2020 eruption. Didn't have gigantic fountains. And in fact, by now they say that the fountains that have petered down, let's play it for you guys here, have petered down to only a few meters high or so. So they're actually in this video here showing not only that middle part, which I first annotated right there, but they're going to pan to the left to show over here this new southwestern fissure, I'll call it, because our western fissure from the previous eruption is a little further to the northeast here, or to the north there, maybe 100 yards or so, 100 meters or so. And this original fissure began opening up shortly after this video, when this video was taken here. And so we'll see later videos that this actually expands further up the wall and cracks over here, and then you see some more cracks down here as well. But clearly the center source is over here on this southwest side, and as far as that area of the fissure. And just to note, our 2020 eruption had 2 vents up on the crater walls as well. And eventually they were both drowned by lava filling the crater, so we'll have to keep an eye on perhaps this elevation here, and an eye on if that might be the story repeating itself again, if the lava will fill up the lake all the way to that point. And perhaps we'll see what happens next, right? Not to say that what's going to happen this time around is what happened the last time around. We just never know. We're just trying to illustrate some of the patterns, and it's something to compare and to go by as we watch the story unfold here. So moving on to our third video, that same area, that's that center fountain area right there. You can see an extra line of fissures over here, slightly further south, and along the edge of the lake over there, but a little further north as well. So let me play this for you guys. And you can see that's probably your 100-foot fountain is in that range right there, I would imagine. And so not as much high fountaining over here, but you can see still quite a lot of lava coming out of these pits. Let's see if I can zoom this in for you guys a little better. Really see what's going on here. Lava streaming down into the edge of this. It's now very rapidly filling a lava lake. The USGS has said in the most recent update, just short of 2 p.m. today, that the lava has averaged about 1 meter of rise per hour for this eruption so far, which is pretty fast. And of course, it can't keep that up because the crater is going to flare out wider and wider as the lava level rises there. So, okay, we'll keep moving along here. This is another photograph that we showed you yesterday, but I just wanted to share this one again because it really maps out this area, right? That bigger island is behind the fume right in here. Those fissures across the center of the crater are right here, and the one on the edge is right over here. It's still in that earlier phase. But it gives you some orientation of where things actually are there. And we'll show you a map in a bit as well. So while we're looking at some pictures, there's a few new ones to point out. You can see here geologists manning all the web cameras, laser rangefinders, video cameras, all the tripods on the edge of the crater there. Well, that's interesting. It looks like could be Patrick, perhaps, but he's easier to see in the other photograph. We have a close-up of Tephra. That's looks very pumiceous. Yeah, it looks pretty heavily like it's got chunks of reticulite. Let's see if I can get it a little better resolution so I can zoom in on it for you guys, since that is an option here. Right, so you see that reticulite kind of texture. You see a couple Pele's hairs. These strands of spun lava glass. It's like a natural cotton candy kind of spun glass there, and little chunks there. Right, this looks a lot more like that fresh lava that we saw from those high fountains higher fountains. We really haven't seen high fountains in a while. But it's essentially, this is our version of pumice that we get here in Hawaii, right? This reticulite rock, this lighter colored golden stuff that's encapsulated in this other skin of lava, we'll call it. That stuff can be 98% air, interconnected like a Brillo pad. So our version of pumice, that's really that froth, right? If you imagine an eruption like a champagne bottle popping the cork and all that foam gets shot out. So we're looking at the foam of the lava here. And that foam of the lava is actually frozen as it flies through the air, and it's very light, of course, and it comes and lands further down. So our version of this pumice is reticulite, 98% air, is so well aerated that if you put it in water, unlike the other pumices, will actually sink because the water would flow right through it, right? So it doesn't actually trap any of that air in air because it's so interconnected. But we'll leave that tangent for another day and come back here to our photographs here. And you'll see the really nice centimeter scale pen, as well as a ruler over here for scale, right? And of course, there is if you recall, the USGS has new chemistry labs that they can analyze all this material. And so anything that gets blown out of the crater is collected here. You can see geologists collecting tephra from the side of that closed crater rim drive that eventually had collapsed into the crater further to the south. And it'll all go back to the lab for geochemical analysis. Okay, this picture is fantastic, of course. Image by Bcar, and you get a wider perspective looking from the east now. This is a similar view as that B1 camera. So, or no, perhaps I'm wrong now. This is a view from the west again. The west vent would be down here, and you can see this western fissure area is glowing down here at the bottom right of this image. And there's the big island, and there's that line of fissures across those center ones there. You can see there is one on that southern edge, larger one, maybe a smaller one over here as well. And we saw that there might be one down in this area over here as well. So interesting that as the lava is rising through that old lava lake that was solidified on its edges, likely against the crater walls and against the surface of the atmosphere here, but still had that liquid core in the middle, right? That seems to have been reactivated, and now it's been rejuvenated by all this fresh gassy magma there. So that is what we have in this image here, and we'll move on because I see you guys have a lot of good questions coming through, so I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but I also want to show you guys all this USGS output from today. A little bit better close-up on that large island there, and you see a little bit more of these bubbling sources, small ones, and then the larger ones. Seems like it's the tallest one in the middle of the lake, and then you see other ones here and here. Of course, this is the one we zoomed in on before, and then further ones over here. There's actually one more, not quite visible, off the screen, off in that direction there. And then a telephoto image of one of the low lava fountains. Photo by Matt Patrick as well. We'll move on from there. And once again, telephoto of those fissures. We looked at the video of that, so I will move on from that. Of course, you guys can all go to the USGS webpage and find all of that as well. So thanks to the USGS release of the first 3 hours of Eruption, and thanks to Bob Martin for collecting a lot of these other webcam images, and to Dane, of course, for compiling these into time lapses for us today. We have a time lapse here from that thermal camera of this sequence of filling the lava lake. So let's play it for you guys here. I don't know if I can make it loop, but here we go. So we have, I'll play it for you guys just all the way through, so you can see a little bit of that circulation pattern. You see there's different sizes of crust in the lake here, and we can maybe take a few minutes to do a little inspection of these frames and see what we can discover. So from this last image here, you can see that there appears to be an entry into the lava lake over here. That's that fissure that's on that edge that's pouring in. You can see it's got a dispersal pattern. Oh, I need a different color here. Let's try yellow. You see the dispersal pattern that comes off that way, and not very much. You see the plates are getting pretty big in this area, so it's not really doing a whole lot over there. It's more pouring in this side. And then of course you see large plates on its backside over here, and the line of fountains are all next to the small, more of that smaller pattern, smaller texture pattern there. Of course, because of the fountains are disturbing the surface of the lava lake, and you can't form as thick a crust, and it can't get quite as big and as large, right? So but you see that these far edges are essentially trying to start crusting over already. And that's what these cooler colors indicate over there. Right? That's just the first order of what we see pretty recently here. But I would like to rewind it. Let's go back. Our time machine over here. And you can see here, let's see if I can get it back a little further. Right, these first few stages here of where the first fissures came out, it seems like they were back here in the backside of this big island. And you can see that they're dropping hotter material on top of it. It's getting plastered with lava fallout right here. So moving on a little further, you see these two arms that come around the island, and they're going to come and meet here in the foreground, and they're burying all these other islets in the background here, right? All this low topography that's part of that crust of that solidified lava lake is all getting drowned here. And these actually might have been in a range of 20, 30 feet tall, perhaps. And you see them disappearing over time. I can fast forward it here. You guys can see that they all eventually go under, right? But curiously, if I go further ahead, you'll see that this back one re-emerges out of the lava. And so the question might be reasonable to think, is the lava draining perhaps? But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jerk this back and forth pretty quickly. So hopefully you can see that there is movement of that back island coherently with this large island, coherently with this west vent, which had also been almost all the way drowned, but they seem to all be rising, lifting up, almost in sync. So if they're all attached to that old lava crust of that lava lake, then that would suggest that that whole layer of rock has now been detached from the crater wall where it was before, and it's now being lifted like a piston head inside and underneath this shallower surface of lava. Right? So it's not exactly like the historical times of epimagma plugs, but it's getting a little bit more similar, where we have this plate, this piston head, submerged fairly shallowly within the lava to where the peaks of it are poking out there and there, and this whole thing seems to be rising. So let me pull it back and forth more quickly for you guys, so you can maybe get the more obvious effect there. So that's really fascinating to see, and we'll have to see how that progresses as well. Right? That's interesting.
Yeah, when I was putting that together, I thought it was bugged out, and I was using the wrong frames or something at first, especially on that bottom one. I was like, wait, what's happening down there? Then I figured it out, but it was so weird to see it, basically the island's floating.
Yeah, it really is, yeah. So yeah, kind of to come back to it, in fact, the lake is not draining. It's the actual piston head rising right there. And yeah, that's interesting. And apparently all these features are all attached and won't be floating around, drifting around like they were before, right? So it seemed like they might have been doing that, but in fact, on closer inspection, now that we have more frames of our video here for animation, it's more obvious that the whole thing seems to be rising coherently as a mass there. So it's interesting. Yeah, we can. I'm sure there'll be questions about the dynamics of the fissures coming up through the bottom of the lake, how that might actually change the dynamics there. We do still have enough pressure right now from those fissures beneath the lake to come up and through it, right? But we theorize perhaps that this line of fountains that you see right here corresponds to a weakness in that crust. And if you, I don't have it lined up here. I know that was requested. I'll have to get that together for you, Marin, a little later. But the area where these fissures does come up is that area that was originally cracked on the east side of that big island. So it was already like a weakness in that crust. It separated this further back, first to cool section of the lava lake. And then you guys may remember the lava lake eventually closed off and retreated back towards the west vent in this direction. And so there was a series of cracks in between, and that is that area where the fissures in the middle did originate. So perhaps that piston head is coherent apart from that crack where the fountains are still able to squeeze through and erupt through the lake surface while also rising that piston head upwards.
Matthew asks a question that's very related to this, points out also that straight line, but asks really about the around the crater wall, that fissure line, or rather curved line, and why it would might take that kind of shape.
On the crater wall?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. There's a... try to see if I can speak about this fairly simply, right? There's all kinds of forces that act on every surface of the volcano. And it turns out that having a cliff face and having a free surface that's sideways will induce any propagation of a crack, right? It'll kind of pull it towards a cliff because that's where it can release that stress and pressure, right? So it's quite often that when you have collapses of calderas and big craters, you have ring faults, a lot of faults that kind of allow that collapse to happen for like once again, a piston-shaped cylindrical kind of plug. And so those are the cracks likely being used by the magma to find their way to the surface. And when it comes near those curved cliffs, it'll essentially bisect them there, and you see the intersection of that curved surface of the maybe planar ideally, but perhaps with a little bit of curvature potentially, intersection of that line with a curved wall of the cliff of the crater. That's perhaps the best that I can discuss that at this point. Yeah, I hope that's what he was getting at. So let's see here. Probably should move on from the thermal. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. But you guys can maybe we'll bring it back up again when we come to our discussion of the questions section here. So let's move on. Depth of the lava lake. Here's our graph in meters. We started off around just shy of 226 or so. So pretty close to 226. And you can see that let's zoom into it here. Let's first point out that this is a 5 meters per hash mark plot. We're looking at the last week here. I better refresh this, Dan, because I'm not getting all the data here at the very right end. There we go.
Right.
And you can see it came up pretty steeply at the beginning. It's a little slow down, started coming up. Again, not quite as steeply, sped up, slow down, sped up, slow down. It's, still meandering a little bit there, right? So that would suggest that there, might be some dynamics at play with that eruption trying to come up through the bottom of the lava lake and pushing everything above it upwards, and how it gets out and which parts move and whether it's pushing the piston up. There's probably a lot of complexity I'm not even getting at there, but you can imagine that all those variables could certainly deform a smooth curve into something that looks like this. Overall, a general pattern, though, you can see is steeper at first and then generally shallowing out. And of course, the question is how quickly does it turn over before it actually flattens out? Will it reach a point where it's visible from the north and from the south overlooks? So that's worth looking at in a little more detail. Here is that point, maybe halfway up this uppermost bar, which is between 245 and 250. So I would estimate we're somewhere around 247 meters now of depth of the lava lake, right? And if you recall, as we were talking about this yesterday, that implies that the lava may already be visible from that southern side of the caldera at the Public Overlook in the National Park at Kanakakoi Overlook. So a question I'm sure will come up. It came up earlier on some of our other posts. How does the actual rate compare now to before? So it's a little tricky because we're looking at essentially imagine it like an ice cream cone shape of this crater. And so when you fill 1 meter at the bottom, it's a lot less volume than 1 meter at the top, right? So there's a natural curve that occurs with this as well. But despite that, you see that it was actually steeper in that first week of eruption, and then it resumed into that natural decay after that. So essentially you had two phases. You had a very voluminous phase that lasted about a week in 2020, and then it slowed to a relative trickle, right? Trickle in a sense where some volcanic trickle was still coming out pretty epically for a long time, for another 5 months essentially. So in comparison, you can see here at the very, very right end of this, not a whole lot of data yet, but we are rising very steeply as well, right? And that's how far we've gotten. And so the question now remains, how far do we go in a steep section? Will we change this character once again and to have a second phase of less voluminous output? And then where does it actually level off, right? So referring back to this graphic we made last year, or maybe earlier this year in response to the 2020 eruption, We estimate, this is based on topographic profiles from GIS analysis of the DEM data released by the USGS. From the north, I estimate that you'd have to be at an elevation above sea level of 780 or so, 779, to see the lava lake surface. Past that that last little ledge. This is what it's all about, is seeing past that lowermost ledge on a crater. And from the south side, perhaps a little bit lower, 757, maybe generalize it to 760, right? And so there's an offset of about 517 meters of between the depth and the elevation there. So I have here my little cheat sheet of how deep it'll have to show on the plot to actually be visible. From the south, it's 242 is a number, and from the north, it's 262. So 242 is back over here. Right? So in theory, even with some error, we should be getting views of that lava lake from the south. Of course, it's very misty and rainy on the summit of the volcano right now. But as it gets dark, as we talk now, I imagine that will become visible through the mist, and the glow should be pretty good there tonight.
There is a question about the depth of the crater to be able to escape into the caldera itself. Do you remember what that number was offhand?
Yeah, so that lowermost lip is, so let me go back to this picture. There's that lowermost lip, it's more or less there, right? In this cross section, it's at around 800 or so. It's not really coming across in this profile. Maybe right there, that one, right? that ledge right there, is at around 800, maybe slightly shy of that, right? So to reach that, back to my cheat sheet, to reach that 800, we're looking at essentially around a 280 lava depth for it to be spilling over. So it'll come into view from both areas, north and south, before that were to happen. And then you'd see essentially the lake coming further and further into view. And then once it hits that uppermost ledge, it'll spread out even more and become even more visible. So chances go up the longer this goes on. And so that's from 800 meters to where it began is perhaps 50 meters or so. So maybe 150 feet or so was how far it was below before this started yesterday. And we've come up to in a range of, where are we now? 247, somewhere in there, perhaps. And,
yeah, about that.
And so that means we've come up from, call it, 15, 18 meters so far, like 60 feet or so. And we still have another 35, twice that far to go, right, as far as elevation, right? Now, I wanted to point this out, and this is why I have this plot here at the bottom, right? As far as fill elevation, right now, I would estimate that we are somewhere around 10 million cubic meters of lava that's come out. Right? 10 million, that puts us, so 247, 10 million. We're more or less in this part of the graph right here. Right? So for us to get to the next viewpoint, which is 262 from the north, right? That's somewhere right in here, it's going to require close to 20 million, twice the volume we have so far. Now, if it keeps up the same rate for the same amount of time, then in another 24 hours, we could possibly get to that north viewpoint, right? Of course, if it slows down and it gets delayed further and further and further, and you guys know how that goes from the last time, it may eventually never actually get the rest of the way. So to finish it off here, for it to get to 800 would be somewhere around 280. That's at the right end of this graph up here. This third line up, 30,000. So it would take 3 times as much lava as we have had erupted so far right now. So that's, so we don't expect the rates that you see in the first few hours to last for that entire time, 72 hours or so. But if they did, then you could get there in 72 hours, right? So more than likely, it takes a little bit longer than that. But, ballpark a weekish would be a reasonable guess, even accounting for some slowdown. And it really comes down to that guessing how much it'll slow down and how fast it'll slow down to really know if that overflow would be visible to us. But that's a little bit more of the math behind it there, and I will not show any more spreadsheet now. We'll move on to the map. Right, so to show you guys what this means, here is the map of the current lava lake in red. That southern overlook at Kanakakoi is down here. Right, essentially, there's a old crater rim drives open to hiking, so you can hike that far and then overlook over here. And you can, that's what I'm talking about from the south view. As far as from the north, we're talking about perhaps Uekahuna by the former Juggler Museum, or Kīlauea overlook as well.
It does sound like we have some people in chat that are saying that it can be seen from there as well.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I've just been waiting for confirmation. You know, if we weren't streaming to you guys live, I could be scanning, you know, all the social media to see what it looks like, and I think, you know, that'll be probably what we're talking about tomorrow and the next day, and all that is what views might actually look like. Right. So okay, so that's our overlooks. I pointed out in the south, Kanakakoi, Uekahuna, and Kīlauea overlook over here. Of course, you know, you don't get as direct a view, but the volcano house is still over here, and there's quite a lot of traffic there in the last couple of days because you can go into the restaurant there, and you don't see directly, but you can see a really amazing glow in the landscape, right? And because we have so many steep craters now, what you often see when the visibility is good enough is you see the glow reflecting and illuminating the backsides of all these craters. So you actually can, you know, it's like a giant nightlight in the bottom of this giant pit. So you can't see the lava itself, but it actually illuminates all the topography, which is really amazing to see. And that's part of the magic of going and seeing, even if it's just glow. Right? So this is the map that was put out yesterday, and after pointing out those areas, and just point out here, they're now using green as a boundary of the national park. So we're all fully within the national park, which means that this eruption is away from people. It's not affecting people. It doesn't see any sign of change right now. You know, there's always a caveat, of course. Eruptions can progress, and, you know, we'll watch for changes, but there's no indication that this is progressing to anything outside the summit area for now, right? And if it does, we'll keep track of it as always. Okay, so, and, you know, in particular, just to restate it a different way, people in the lower east rift zone right now have nothing to worry about, and, you know, there's no sign of anything to worry about. Someday we will. That's kind of what I'm saying by not right now, because it's the lower east rift zone. Someday you will, but no sign of it right now. Okay, so zooming into this lake surface here, I just wanted to point this out. It actually are mapped out in orange here, the different fissures. Right? So here is our southwest fissure is right there, and they're positioned relative to the former west vent of the eruption, that little island there. The large island in the middle of the lava lake, and it's positioned relative to the fissures which opened up in the middle of the lava lake. You can see there's how they have them mapped out, and that little couple in the northeast, and here is those ones in the south, closer on that southern edge there, right? And so most of these down here, all this group is essentially through the lake surface or at its edge. And this one over here is farther up on a crater wall and has a little bit more, and essentially is pouring down, cascading into it. And this is the one that might be telling, right? So interesting, you know, if there's enough pressure to sustain these fountains through the middle of the lake, then clearly there's enough pressure to put it out of the side, right? It'd be interesting to see if at any point these middle ones shut off. That might tell you, okay, well, maybe there's enough pressure there that it's going to find an easier way out, and maybe it uses that option, as we saw after the first week in 2020 when we had a switch from the former north vent, the original vent of 2020, to the west vent. Yeah, after that first event was drowned. So we'll be watching those storylines as well. Okay, let me move on from the map here. Back here, okay. And, yeah, we'll check out some of these webcams, and let me make sure I refresh them to get our closest to sunset view here. So from the Kīlauea west camera, there's that current view. There's that higher west vent. You can see a little bit of spatter, actually fountain. Maybe you guys can see that, or maybe not. Right there, and you can see that there are still vents. The ones on the backside of this big island seem to have been diminished substantially. This one's a little bit larger, but it's still quite a bit smaller than before. And over here too looks quite a bit smaller than before. So hard to tell really right here, but you know, that's one of the storylines we're looking at is, will these fountains diminish in activity and switch to the southwest area because of its differential elevation there. Okay, so there is an automatic 24-hour animation from the USGS, and that's what I'll show you guys right here. You see it changes color to that night view, black and white at night, and then you see it come back into the color in the daytime there. So in the daytime here, you see the fountains are smaller than at the beginning of the eruption there, so that's something to track here as well. Let's move on to the next camera, the S1 camera. Let's refresh it as well. And looking from the south, that large island is in here. You can't really see off that southwest fissure, but the ones we can see in the middle of the lake, you can see that it does seem to be reduced significantly here. This image is from 10 minutes ago. There. So the automatic 24-hour time lapse to share with you guys. There it is. You can see how in comparison to that initial burst, right, that this fountain really is diminished quite a bit. Right, and perhaps part of that is not only the elevation of the vents there, but the fact that we have now enabled the whole crust of the lava lake to rise as a piston, right? So rather than pushing all the pressure through the crack in that crust, we're now putting some of that pressure to actually lifting the crust itself. And as that happens, you can imagine there's less pressure that can come through the crack and up and out of it. So that's why it's not quite so clear exactly. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Next camera here is the B1 camera from the east. So we've gone from the west to the south to the east now. And from the east view, let's zoom in a little more. There is that back fissure and a back wall. And you can see here diminished in the center of the lake, but still active. Okay, and with automatic animation here. This poor camera gets really blown out here at night. You don't really see much, but you can see the sequence in the daytime when it comes back to the fountains there. So you can maybe notice that in the initial phase, there are many more fountains and they're covering a larger area than this later phase here. Okay, let's move on. I showed you guys these pictures already. Let's look at the earthquakes. So here is our red Kīlauea. I have it set for just the last day of earthquakes, and what you can see is there's not a whole lot of them. There are still some, especially down over here, southwest and southeast parts of the main caldera. Interesting how that's localized, right? This is similar to that area of that recent intrusion in the south. Let's see if I can highlight this a little darker for you guys, right there. But really, it's decreased significantly. And to put it in context here, let's reload this as well. Earthquake rates and depth for the past month provided by the USGS. This is earthquakes per day. We peaked yesterday at 160 earthquakes in one day, and you can see that today we're going to end up somewhere in a range of less than 40 or so. So it's quite a bit down. You can see that we had that ramping up of activity was began around the 25th or so with that first flurry, and then slightly elevated, and then really peaked right here. And this was when our eruption began, right at that point in time, right there. Zooming out a little bit, right? So you can kind of see that it was after a long period of quiet following a previous intrusion, which ended on a 30th. It would have been back in here with a not quite that high spike, maybe a 120 or so, something like that. So okay, zooming out a little more. Here's the past year. And now we're looking at earthquakes per week, so we're not going to get the resolution of day to day. Yesterday and today get lumped together. And relatively speaking, not a whole lot of earthquakes compared to the intrusion. Not a whole lot of earthquakes compared to earlier last year when we had the previous intrusion and a previous build up to the eruption. That background level was quite a bit higher. 500 earthquakes per week, at least 600 or so. And you can see we didn't have that pattern here. So there was a little bit of a change, and perhaps because of this sequence of summit eruption, intrusion, we didn't have to do as much work, or we were able to wiggle the volcano without quaking it as much. And we did see it inflating for all that time, so it was no surprise that this was going to happen. The timing is always unpredictable, the exact timing of when it's going to happen. But the fact that we were poised to do something, we've essentially bought ourselves a few weeks for the last intrusion. Volcano's still been filling the entire time, inflating and swelling, and so ultimately not surprised that it popped out at the summit after all that time. Okay, moving on here. Seismographs. We've discussed seismographs in the past, and since we had something actually happen, let's show you guys what that looks like on a record. Okay, so this is a 48-hour record. It's going back 2 days. So this is the beginning of the eruption right here. A little bit of increased tremor right there. That first 15, 30 minutes perhaps. And now we have a lower level background tremor, right? You can see how this differs from the pattern we had beforehand. And so this is what the obvious signal looks like. And you see it's on every station. It's not only a couple hours of the day that you might say, oh, that might be human traffic or something like that. It's consistent across all the hours of the day and night and across all the geography. And you can see that obviously some stations don't pick it up quite the same way. But there it is, right? The East Rift is actually detecting a little bit of that tremor as well through that whole plumbing system there. But the farther away you go, especially down the lower East Rift, you really don't see any of that resonance as well. You do see the earthquakes being felt. The earthquakes that happen at the summit, they're detected across the whole system, the whole volcano, but nothing really locally happening there. Okay, moving on. Deformation data, the tilt plot here. Probably that hasn't changed a little that much, but here's our 2-day tilt plot, and maybe worth looking in a little bit of detail. At that first phase right here, there was a pretty steep rising, right? So it was probably when this first peak began coming up and an earthquake started popping off yesterday that the USGS made their call to upgrade from yellow to orange. And of course, shortly afterwards, we did get the higher big spike. We went from orange to red as the volcano actually came into eruption shortly thereafter. And that first movement, you can see now we're in this exponential decay here. And at some point, this will flatten out and we'll see what comes next, right? Imagine that quite often once these things flatten out, they start reinflating again, as all depending on a balance of how much magma can get in, is coming in and how much can get out of the volcano at a particular moment in time. So we'll keep an eye on that, but essentially the pattern is deflation. You don't really see a whole lot of different change there. You notice that we inflated perhaps on a scale of 10 microradians or so. And since then, we've deflated those 10 and another 10 or so, right, past what we were before. So these are pretty big changes happening. The whole volcano is essentially exhaling, and the ground is tilting back downwards in response to that release of pressure, like lancing a boil kind of thing. Okay, GPS. He's not going to tell us.
I was saying if you
go ahead.
You want to try and do some questions because we have some that are somewhat relevant in here.
Let me just mention the GPS. There's not a whole lot to learn here because it's updating only once a day, and you can see that the rates have been changing, but really it's going to take more days to go by until we actually can see that. So yes, Dane, and no change in a low reach for some either. Let's do some questions.
Yeah, let's get some of these out of the way. There's been some really good questions guys have submitted in the chat, so these are just some of the ones that I haven't been able to answer or just thought they would be really good to highlight for the rest of the viewers. So Boomer asks, why did this eruption start in the lava lake, the new vent under the lake, and instead of trying to escape through one of the cracks on the perimeter of the lake itself?
That's a great question. I don't know. It can do either one. It seems like it did both, actually, right? It did come up on the fractures on the side as well. And it seems like there was just essentially so much pressure all of a sudden there that it came out everywhere it possibly could, right? Well, yeah, so interesting. I'd really like, I wonder if there's any way to get at what that shape of that fissure is down beneath a lava lake, right? Maybe some more detailed seismic studies. I'm not sure. Maybe gravity, I'm not sure. We'll be curious to hear what USGS has to report about that.
Right. It's interesting to think that the most of the plug got lifted up too, like with the whole thing coming up as a one solidified unit.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
Yeah, that's crazy. Kenny asked, do you think we have a bigger batch of magma coming and this will outlive the 2020 eruption?
So that's a great question. I haven't shown you guys the gas data yet, but the gas measurement reported by the USGS for yesterday was 85,000 tons per day, which exceeds what we saw in December 2020. So that, there may be some buildup of gas perhaps, right? But that also suggests that you have some fresh magma coming in too, and, a good amount of it perhaps. And I don't know how long that surge actually is, like how big is the slug coming through? That's something I don't know. And perhaps with the inversion of the deformation data, the USGS might be able to get at that. But yeah, that's to be determined, I guess. Yeah.
I'm telling you, we got some good questions today. Shannon asked, after the magma stopped rising during the earlier 2020 eruption, what kept the lava then from draining back out?
Well, I think that's another great question. We don't know if there was any draining. It seems like there probably wasn't a huge amount of it because we didn't see that much drop in the lava lake even after the fissures stopped putting out lava. That's there's a lot that we don't really know. Of course, we want to discuss it a little bit there. Different from this time, the cracks were not on the floor of the crater back then. They were up on the sides exclusively. So there was no path through the bottom of the floor for it to drain that way, for starters. But I mean, with a caveat, right? There actually were some lower fissures of that west vent that were on a crater floor pretty early on. But they don't seem like they actually ended up being a drain. We never knew if they were or weren't, but it didn't seem like they were acting that way. So perhaps, I don't know, they closed up early on is one possibility. Or perhaps the pressure, the overburden pressure of the lava lake was too much for them. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because all those cracks are all connected. It's really an intersection of these surfaces in 3D, and really what looks like 2 or 3 different cracks in the surface may all connect. And when you just dodge in 2018, right, it's like looking at your hand, right, with different fissures being fingers of a common blade that's moving through the rock, and then where it can crack to the surface, it might come up in different fingers, but it's all attached to the same body at depth. So interesting to think about there. That the main difference there. We didn't seem like after we drowned the north vent early on, it didn't seem like it was draining back in there. We didn't see any movement of the lava surface, and it seemed like it might have done that early on a little bit, but then it stopped doing it as well. So it's not really clear to us. There's a lot we don't know about the plumbing, that shallow plumbing of the volcano, especially there, right? And why those paths went up or close.
I think it also has to do with that the way in which we saw the vents close too, where it wasn't like they just shut off all of a sudden. They did shut off all of a sudden, but it was only once the lava got over the top of them and started creating that little bit of resistance to it.
Yeah, they did decrease gradually, right? Because it had to erupt through the lake as they were drowning more and more and more. So like it did kind of dwindle before it shut off completely.
Right, and it seems like there was still some pressure there. It wasn't like it was draining away. But definitely, the good questions. We have one more question here from JW that asked, do you think that the current batch of lava that's erupting and will be erupted will be proportionate to the amount that injected into the Southwest Rift Zone a couple weeks ago?
That's a good question. I really have no idea. It all depends on whether it's the batch coming up. I think the batch coming up is probably being, it's a long-term slug, but the slug's got parts of it that have more volume and parts that have less volume, right? Imagine when you look at a lava lamp and those like sausages that come up and they have different diameters, and so you can have more than less than more than less, and that kind of thing. But let me pull up. I was talking about the tilt here, and we do have the tilt plot from Sand Hill here, which is interesting because this, like all the stations around the summit, is showing this blue line, which is towards Halemaumau. So this is a signal we're seeing over there, but also the tangential signal, which is pointing more towards the area of the intrusion that we just saw into that southwest rift, is also tilting in a manner suggesting that it's emptying, and perhaps that area might be helping to feed the current eruption as well. So the question maybe gets at the point of, okay, we had some amount of volume that got stored and locked away in another room perhaps, and so we need to replace that volume. That's volume we have to erupt. That's one way to look at it, but really the door wasn't locked. That stuff is coming back out of the room to join what's coming up from below, and altogether it's a combination of that volume. It probably doesn't all come out, of course, because a lot of it did work to get in there and move things around and spread things around. So some portion of it might come back. Definitely not all of it. And then whatever volume coming up with a slug as well combined with it. And we'd have no way of knowing how long that slug lasts, right? And that's really the biggest question is it like call it a days-long slug? Is it a weeks-long slug? Is it a months-long slug? That's the kind of thing we don't know, and we'll have to keep an eye on. And right, in the first week's the most dynamic, so expect a lot of change in the first week. But really, it's how do we progress through to the end of the first week and beyond? What are the signals changing? Are they changing quickly? And so we'll be able to say a lot more at that point in time if it goes on that long.
Right. We do have some more questions about the rift zones. First, the Southwest Rift Zone. Do you think there is a higher likelihood now than before this eruption for activity to spread into the Southwest Rift Zone?
So as it currently stands, it seems like all the pressure is being relieved at the summit at Halemaumau. If we have some giant slug that's going to last for months and months and months, then you can start talking about, okay, now we can start filling other parts of the volcano, like the upper Southwest Rift, like the upper East Rift. And that would be a prerequisite to some further stage of what people were really the most worried about, of lava going back down to the lower East Rift. And that's the process that we expect is going to take decades to happen all the way to there. But that's the sequence in which it would go. And so we don't expect it to happen really that fast, but it all depends on the size of the slug coming up that we can't see. So really, when you start seeing it tail off, then okay, maybe that's the end of that pulse. And you never know if it's not going to speed back up again, but that's the kind of microanalysis that you try to do to make your most educated guess. And we're just guessing. We don't know.
Right. Last one is from Mad Hackler, who says, do you think we will see a rift zone eruption, let's say East Rift Zone, in the next year? 1967, 1968 was a year before Mauna Ulu, and both rift zones are open with magma right now. What are your thoughts?
It certainly could, right? That Middle East Rift Zone between Mauna Ulu and Pu'o'o is much more active, much more frequently than either the Lower East Rift Zone or the Upper East Rift Zone, it turns out, right? So it would not be unusual to see that similar pattern, that at some point, once we do refill the whole summit and we do refill those upper rift zones, you start seeing those first signs of pressure as small eruptions on the Middle East Rift Zone, right? And they can do that for a long time before it actually does anything with the Lower East Rift Zone, right? The chance is always there. It's a little bit, once it gets to it's erupting at Pu'o'o, it's always a little bit closer. That's, a step towards being able to get to the Lower East Rift Zone, which I'm sure is what everyone is worried about who lives there. But there's no sign of that quite yet. And even if it does go to the Middle East Rift Zone and have that pattern of a little bit here, a little bit there, just that doesn't mean there's enough pressure for it to push all the way through and out, right? And really in 2018, what complicated the whole thing was that 6.9 earthquake on the south flank, which opened up that whole path from the middle to the Lower East Rift Zone. So absent that 6.9 earthquake or something like that happening, that there's really not a whole lot of reason right now to be concerned, right? Long term, the whole Lower East Rift Zone is going to get covered again. It's just a matter of geologic time. We all know that, right? And we're just essentially trying to carve out, right? You have to do some risk management. Is it worth it, right? And if this kind of thing stresses you out, then it probably is not worth it, and you can take advantage of the county buyout program and relocate there.
We do have a $35 super chat from our friend Gary Bryan. He says, great work, guys. We also had a $20 super chat from Langer, who asks, is it correct that in 2018 lava didn't overflow, but instead got deep enough and caused enough pressure to force through lava tubes?
That sounds like a little bit of a loaded question. So, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, though.
Overflow. Let's talk about the overflow parts first, right? So, overflow, there were overflows of the lava lake at Halemaumau, right? So, to recap, the lava lake at Halemaumau emerged in 2008 and lasted until the early days of May 2018. Once eruption began in Lower East Rift Zone, it started draining away, and that was it, right? That was the last time we saw lava visible from the ground at Kīlauea surface, and perhaps today is the next day since then, more than 3 years on, maybe 3.5 years on, right? So that's why it's such a noteworthy thing there. There were overflows in 2015. There were overflows in 2018 in the months ahead of the collapse and the Lower East Rift Zone eruption. So that there were small scale overflows. They were all within the pit of Halemaumau, and didn't come out into the main caldera floor, right? Because before we had the overlook vent was a smaller crater inside of Halemaumau crater that was inside of the caldera, the largest crater. So we had it in that innermost zone was the lava lake, and it spilled over into that middle-sized crater, but not beyond that, right? But I want to say there was a 13 or 14 acre lava flow spillover of, might have been more than that. Ignore that number there. But it was a substantial, the whole 2/3 perhaps of the floor of Halemaumau were covered by that overflow in late April, right? There are time lapses of that we've referred to before. It's in most of our 2018 coverage early on, that time lapse of the lava lake overflowing. So that's part one. Part two, it went, there are underground passageways that connect the summit to the Lower East Rift Zone. And those passageways are what we call the rift zone itself. As far as lava tubes, we reserve that term for lava flows at the surface, which freeze over at the surface. So it's like a river in the wintertime, where you have water or some liquid flowing. The very surface freezes over, but the liquid still flows beneath that crust. With ice, there's a spring, that upper layer melts, and you have your open liquid once again. But with lava, once that rock crust forms, it encases it. It doesn't remelt usually, the whole thing. It could collapse potentially, but it doesn't often remelt it. And so now you have an encased lava tube. So lava tubes are usually formed from the top down at the surface, right? And they're on a scale of a few yards or a few meters deep or so. The lava moves down through the rift zones to the Lower East Rift Zone, and that's going at a depth of about a half mile to a mile down. So much, much, much deeper. We think that they're more like a series of dikes, vertical blades that all work through the fault zones that allow the south flank to move to the south and the rest of the volcano to stay to the north. And so the magma goes in there, pushes in the rift zone, spreads it out, and pushes the volcano and spreads it apart like that. So those are all the dynamics. The magma injection, the south flank moving, the summit, and the connections of the summit to the rift zones. That was the crash course right there. We have a lot more detail on all those topics in separate streams on our channels. Look for those playlists on the volcano science to get at that.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this round of questions. We might have time for one more brief round at the end.
Right. Let's see if I can wrap it up here.
Back to you.
Yeah. Okay. So.
All right.
Other tilt plots here. Here's a summit area. All the blue lines are showing that same going down here. In Sand Hill, we looked at the green line as the only one doing that as well. You see the green line not having that same effect at Kīlauea. Even Summer Camp, which has a lot of missing data, you see not having that pattern between the blue and green lines. And just to make sure we cover concerns for the rift zone here, here's the escape road. Not showing any giant changes there. Small changes at Pu'o'o as well. Small changes at Jonica. Really, there's no sign of anything further down the rift zone. So we're not just saying it, we're showing it to you guys here as well. Okay, moving on. Put this up a little earlier. This is the plot of SO2 emission rates for the past year. Our newest data point's up here. It's 85,000 tons per day. Here is a 2020 eruption. Here's how high as we reached. So this is a pattern we expect to see. Is it's pretty flat, then it spikes upwards, and then it decays downwards. And this gas rate is quite telling. It's one of our best proxies for the eruption rate of the volcano. So high gas often relates to high eruption rate. And if you were to consider it to be a 1-to-1, there is a higher eruption rate now than there was in late 2020, right? With the caveat that you may have had some gas stored within that liquid core of the lava lake that was an extra bonus bump there. And over the next few days, we'll be able to see how much effect that actually has, whether the next point's substantially further down or whether it starts decaying like we saw happen over here in 2020, right? So the rate of decay is what we're talking about in 2020. The rate of decay was very quick, and that's what we're waiting to figure out here as well. Will it have a quick rate of decay, or will it draw out longer? And we'll have to wait and see as usual. Okay, a little bit more on the gas here. Our past month plot is a little deceptive here. If you look at this, it looks like it says 0.8 tons per day, 1 ton per day, but there's a big, well, not big, there's a very, very small times 10 to the 5th power down here in a corner, right? So this is looking at tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So this is 80,000 and that's 100,000, right? So this was our value up here, and all these other values coming in at pretty much 0 for the rest of the month here. That's why I took you back to that other plot. As far as our ambient measurements here, we saw the first signal at Sand Hill, that closest station to the southwest rift zone. to the summit on a southwest rift zone right here. That signal spiking to 2 ppm. We saw the next station at Cone Peak come in just recently here, 2 ppm as well, with a slight delay. It's probably just slightly farther away. The wind's got to be a little bit better to keep that plume close enough to the ground where it gets detected by the instrument farther away. Not likely was why we had a delay here as well. The first part of the eruption, when we had that 80,000 tons manual measurement, was a geologist shooting up at the cloud underneath the plume, whereas these fixed stations require that gas to blow right at them for them to measure it, right? So that's why you see it coming in not quite as consistently or not quite as intensely, and varying quite a bit. So Sand Hill is the furthest or closest to the summit, so that one showed it first. Cone Peak next. Our farthest station down at Pu'uko'e is not, maybe it might be showing a little bit of peak here, right? You remember our calibration spike from last month is right here, so our scale is way off. So 2 ppm would still be just way down here. So maybe if we zoom way into the bottom end, maybe this little bump here is that signal, that 2 ppm signal as well. Not very strong close to the ground, which is interesting right there in a national park, right? Of course, as a VOG blows across the island, it does other things beyond that. So page never likes to come in stored, so let's refresh it. Hawaii State air quality data here, and we're looking at the air quality index. And so you can see that down here in an area of Na'alehu, we are showing a station at 128. I'm not sure what that one is. That one is a hourly average of, not labeled here, maybe at the bottom, PM 2.5 air quality index there, right? So you can see that really spiked here at 2 p.m. Oh, no. Doesn't zoom in. At 128 PM 2.5, right? So clearly that gas plume that comes out of the national park that's going higher in the air above those stations is now coming back down towards the ground somewhere. For all we know, it goes like this and comes down outside of Mauna Loa, which is a big mountain over here. And Na'alehu seems to be getting some effects of that right now, but not anywhere else. Although I think Pahala, when I checked earlier, yeah, there it is, did get into the yellow for quite a few hours of the day as well. So we couldn't see it as well yesterday, but now those signals are coming through. Let's look at Ocean View as well. Ocean View, you can see currently barely in the green. Earlier was in the yellow and got into that orange level as well, right? Similar peak up at 124. So starting to see some effects. This is the biggest impact of the eruption, of course, is the gas. There's no habitation in the national park there. That's where it's supposed to be. That's the best place for an eruption, is in the summit and what I like to call the lava stadium. It seems like maybe they're going to open the floor here and actually we'll get a look at the floor of the stadium there. But downwind is where we're having the effects now as well. So we'll see if this expands. In the eruption last year and earlier this year, we saw the effects of this gas plume, not just here, but beginning here and eventually wrapping around to the Kona side and increasing the VOG over there. No ocean entry, so no lays, but we do have the VOG, the particles that actually compose of sulfur minerals that will become sulfuric acid, and sulfate particulates that cause like a haze in the air that appears like a fog, essentially. That's why we call it a volcanic fog or VOG. Okay, let's see if I can pull up the radar here. It seems like we've cleared up a little bit. We have had some moisture coming through the area, and earlier today there was reports of thunder in the area, and so I wanted to point this out, and mahalo Marin for bringing us the capture of the GOES-17 image showing the concentration of possible lightning here. So you can see directly over that crater of the volcano. Imagine with that much heat and gas coming out and all this moisture blowing in off the ocean, creating some atmospheric effects there. And I can't tell you much more about it apart from showing you guys this weather plot and reporting that we did hear quite a bit of thunder earlier in the day, not hearing it quite as much right now. Right, and there is the GOES-17 plot. Let's see if I can, yeah, let's move on from that. Looking at windy, you see not a huge signal there yet, an island, right? It does see it show it's blowing perhaps northeast a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to all this other SO2 that's coming from China and other volcanoes in the world, right? There's China. China's always this giant dark red spot. But other volcanoes, you can see the red spots there, and there are the Canaries and their effect as well, blowing over North Africa, Sahara, and Eastern Europe, as you can see here as well. So that's the bigger picture of VOG. Relatively speaking, we have not registered those levels on our satellite yet, right? And of course, we have a lot more buffer around us everywhere there. Okay, while we're at the satellites, we're going to turn to Rafael Grandin of IGPV here, who is sharing radar satellite from Capella Space, and he is part of the Institut de Physique du Globe de Paris, right? The Paris Institute of Global Physics, very roughly translated. I'm not sure how they like to be called in English, but here is essentially a new lava lake surface right there, the island, and you can see they've compared it to the thermal. So that's just a little cool thing to throw in here at the end. Okay. The most recent update from USGS is a source for a lot of this information, so I want to make sure we touch base on this and give them all the credit they deserve here. This is from 1:42 p.m. today. We're going to be getting daily updates while we have warning red status here. So we are erupting. Seismicity and gas is elevated. All activity is confined to the crater. Multiple vents from the floor and western wall of the crater. SO2 emissions remain high. We're estimated around 85,000 tons per day just after eruption started yesterday afternoon at 3:21 p.m. So that's literally that first minute, right? So maybe it's a little bit skewed that way as well, right? Maybe if that decreases exponential, within 5 hours, it's back to 60,000. I mean, who knows? We'll have to just wait and see what the data shows. Lava lake observations. The lava lake has been rising approximately 1 meter yard per hour since eruption began, right? Average. In general, you might expect it to slow as the diameter increases there. The lava lake has not exhibited widespread circulation overnight, with localized and discontinuous areas of crustal-foundering, a process by which cool lava crusting the surface of the lava lake is overridden by less dense liquid from below, causing the crust to sink into the underlying lake lava. So it's something we've seen before, and perhaps this, when we're talking about the possibility of circulation and foundering and all that, you got to remember that unlike what we had 6 months ago, we have this piston halfway just below the surface of the lava now. And so you have this barrier to circulation that exists just below the surface. And that's got to complicate things. So I'll just move on from there. Maximum fountain height so far observed yesterday was estimated to be 25 to 30 meters high, 82 to 98 feet high. I generalized it to 80 to 100, though most fountains are currently only a few meters or yards high. East Rift, no unusual activity, may have slowed. Nothing's changed there as far as the wording. In hazard analysis, they say the volcano is entirely within a closed area of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Therefore, high levels of gas are the primary hazard of concern, as this hazard can have far-reaching effects downwind. And that is most of it there. Additional hazards include Pele's hairs and other lightweight volcanic glass fragments from the lava fountains that dust within a few hundred meters of the vent. So that's all within a closed area, so that really doesn't apply to anyone who is in the places you're supposed to be. Okay, let's wrap it up here. Today is Thursday, so I'm expecting there would be a volcano watch, but it is not out yet, so we'll have to bring that to you guys perhaps tomorrow. And I did want to make sure to mention that we do have our Hawaii Tracker Facebook group here, and that has all kinds of, let's see if I can pull this one here so you can get a better view, which has all kinds of our text updates, our short videos, other island interests here as well. But if we want to, maybe I'll refresh this so we can get the most popular things here. So if you want to see everything that's going on with Kīlauea, for example, you can see images of people who are visiting the park and what they're seeing, what they're sharing, right? So, for example, here, Harry Durgan from Mauna Loa Strip Road, Milky Way and a lava glow, lava pictures, and all kinds of interesting things here. So I encourage you, since we don't have the time to look at all of it today, that you go on there and look, right? You can see the overflight videos, all the different images and all that. And I'm sure that as We have already reports of lava like visible from the surface, that at some point those will make it up here in a Facebook group as well. So I invite you guys to go and look for yourselves at all. There's just too much content for us to get it through here, and I only have 5 minutes left now. Okay, so once again, we do have a lot of that stuff on hawaiitracker.com, although it's more of our core contributors, as Dana and myself here. But that's another place you can go and check. And on a hawaiitracker.com website, I will pass it on to Dana to say our thank yous here. But we do have opportunities for advertising, including live reads in our podcasts. We do have donations. We do graciously accept donations, of course. It's a lot of work to do all this, as you guys can imagine. We hope to be investing in this model here, right? That there will be more reward in the future, but at the moment it is still a struggle. So we appreciate anything you guys can contribute. And if you can't do financial, of course, like, share, subscribe, and that helps us as well. Right, Dane?
Yeah, definitely. The subscribing, the liking, and the sharing really goes a long way with the YouTube algorithms to help get this content more viewed, better distribution, more eyes. Always helps out the channel. We do have some sponsors we want to thank. First one is Kīlauea's Bar and Grill in the heart of Pahoa. These sponsors really help to keep this type of research going, so we really appreciate them. So Kīlauea's Bar and Grill in the heart of Pahoa. If you're coming out to the islands, onto the east side of the Big Island, you got to check out Kīlauea's or their new establishment in Orchid Land that's going to be going up in October, or opening in October. It's going to be 2 real nice restaurants, competitive pricing, indoor, outdoor dining options, takeout options. Really good place for locals or visitors to check out. I go there frequently. Really good establishment, nice staff. So we appreciate their continued support of our podcast and of Hawaii Tracker as well. The second one is Kalani Tours, and they operate primarily out of Kona side. They do a few different kinds of tours. They do volcano tours, which we're probably going off right now. They do some really good volcano tours. They also do waterfall and Kona Coffee Farm tours. They take small tour groups, so it's more personalized. You get your questions answered, and it's not the big box style of tour where they put you on a bunch of people on a giant bus and shuffle them around. This gives you that knowledge and your questions answered. So we really appreciate them as well. So that's Kalani Tours out of Kona. We also appreciate the Hawaii Community Foundation. We have had grants from them to help support this type of these types of broadcasts as well. So we appreciate them and everybody else that helps this production continue. There is not that much time left. I know you got to get going, so let's just say we'll do one last question.
All right.
So, question here is about the east. We're back to the East Rift Zone from Matt Hacker, and he says it's almost like the area between Mauna Ulu and Highway 130 has a second magma chamber. It's the Lower East Rift Zone erupted from both the deep, like what we know as the deep East Rift Zone and the summit with high pressure. How does that kind of relate? Do they both go in, or does one drive? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a big topic, and I don't have any solid answers. But generally speaking, the way I think of it is that deep rift is driving the south flank spreading more so, isn't that? And that's why you see it more persistent and consistent. South flank moving despite what's happening in the shallow regions. Whether the rift zone is doing something or not, the south flank still keeps trucking away at a steady rate. So there's some aspect of that deep rift driving the south flank movement, which is an important driver, of course, and that propagates upwards at some point in time. When you move it from below, you can definitely have that upper effect as well, right? So the lavas geologically analyzed from the rift zone seem to mostly be summit derived or rift zone stored, right? So we don't really see any evidence of deep rift magmas coming out. So as far as what erupts out of there, connected to the summit is the paradigm that's the safest to go with, right? And not to say that things won't happen a different way someday, but we just don't have as much evidence to support that right now. Mauna Loa Southwest Rift does have some submarine vents that do show some signs of deep rift magmas, for example. But that's a whole other kind of worm, so it is possible, but we haven't seen it on Kīlauea. That's did I get at it? Did I answer it?
Yeah, I think that gets it. It's a big question, and it's not very well established either. I mean, we were researching this not all that long ago. Somehow we were researching Mauna Loa, and we get onto the south flank of Kīlauea, right, and the deep east rift zone. So there's a lot of questions around that. So I appreciate the question, though. Yeah,
there's one question I saw earlier that I wish I would have mentioned a little more detail. So I want to pull up this map at the very end of the last eruption when we had that frozen lava lake surface right there. And that area of that lava lake, 45 hectares, 112 acres there. Right? So whoever's asking how big is that lava lake, it's bigger than that now because it's come up a little bit. So you probably added a couple acres on the side there, a few acres on the side or so. But that's the answer. When we talk about that whole thing filling with 60 feet, 18 meters of lava, it's across this entire area, minus the Big Island, of course. And so I want to make sure we address that as well there. So, mahalo, Dane. Mahalo, everyone who contributed. Mahalo, all of our question askers and chat participants as well. I see that you guys have been really active today, and I'll have to go back and catch up on that since I can't do all my narration and read everything all concurrently. But we will be back with you guys likely tomorrow, and we'll see what happens from there.
One last thing, we do have another $10 super chat from Brend. Is that Brenda? It just says Brend. It just says thank you. We appreciate that. We do also take donations on hawaiitracker.com/support. So if you want to support us there, we always appreciate that. And like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff really does help the channel. That'll do it for me. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, mahalo, Dane. Mahalo, everyone. We'll be back with you guys soon. And depending how the eruption progresses from there, we may not do it every day. We might switch to every other day as things slow down a little bit. And of course we have other obligations at some point as well, right? So we'll see how things go. But I think tomorrow is called for to kind of follow up on what's happening. The beginning part of the eruption changes the most quickly, has the most uncertainty. So that's what we'll plan to do, even if we keep them a little shorter, maybe more frequently. We'll see how it goes, depending on how much content is put out by the USGS, which is really how we get all of our content. So one last big mahalo to the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory for doing such a great job putting out all this content, right? Without all the pictures and videos that they're taking and sharing, we wouldn't have anything to look at apart from the glow in the sky. Until we see those pictures come in tonight. So if you guys have those, feel free to submit them to Hawaii Tracker. You can go on our website as well and post things there as well. Everything is moderated, so we will have to screen your post and make suggestions of how to improve it. But we do encourage participation on our website as well to help get our. That helps us be able to try to monetize this as well to fill the role that we're trying to fill, which is to educate our community so that we can be more resilient and prepared and informed when one of these events does eventually make it into our communities. And so we're on an active island. It's just a matter of time before it happens again. We know it's going to happen. We hope it's a long time. We really do. But regardless of when that is, we want to be ready. So we're starting now. And that's a lot of the motivation we have for sharing this and trying to break it down and teaching and engaging and all of that. And so that's why we're having county support as well. So mahalo county, but we haven't quite got to where we're sustainable. So appreciate all your support. Until tomorrow, you guys. He's Dan DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha.